My name is Nadia Okafar, and I am 30 years old. And on the evening of my birthday dinner, I placed a folder on the table in front of my father and said nothing, and watched 12 years of a narrative he had been constructing collapse in the 12 minutes that followed. I want to start with the folder, because the folder is the center of everything, and because understanding what was in it and why I had it and how long I had been building it makes everything else make sense. But before the folder, I need to tell you about the dinner, and before the dinner, I need to tell you about my father, because the dinner was the most extreme version of something my father had been doing for 30 years, and it only makes full sense in the context of those 30 years. My father, Emmanuel Okafar, is a man of 61 who built a career in civil engineering across 4 decades of early mornings and precise work, and the specific discipline of a man who understands that structures require correct foundations, and who has applied that understanding to his profession with great success, and to his family with considerably more complicated results. He is not a cruel man in the ordinary sense of the word. He is a man who has a set of standards that he believes are correct and who has spent his entire adult life applying those standards to everyone around him, with the particular certainty of someone who has never been seriously challenged on whether the standards themselves are the problem. I have been challenged by those standards my entire life, not because I was failing by any reasonable measure, because his measure was not reasonable. It moved. Every time I reached it, he revised it upward, and the revision was never acknowledged as a revision. It was simply the new position from which my insufficiency was assessed. I had graduated at the top of my class. The standard moved to the quality of the institution. I had published in respected journals. The standard moved to the prestige of the journals. I had built a career at 30 that most people would have been proud to have at 40. The standard moved to a question about why I had not done more. Before I tell you what my father said at that dinner table, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city in the comments. I love knowing where you are when you listen to this. Now, let me tell you about the birthday dinner and what I brought to it. I had been keeping the folder for 4 years, not because I planned from the beginning to use it the way I used it at that birthday dinner. I am a researcher by profession, and researchers document. It is not a choice exactly. It is a reflex, the instinct to record what happens accurately and to keep the record in a form that can be retrieved and examined later when you need to understand something that was difficult to understand while it was happening. The folder contained 3 categories of material. The first was professional, my academic record, complete, my publication history, complete, my employment record, complete, my salary history, my awards and recognitions, the letters of recommendation I had received across the course of my career from people whose judgment my father claimed to respect, arranged chronologically, indexed, the kind of document that took 4 years to build and about 9 minutes to understand if you sat down and read it properly. The second category was financial, my savings account statements, my investment portfolio, the mortgage documents for the property I had purchased 2 years earlier in my name only, the net worth calculation my financial advisor had prepared at my request the previous year that showed, in the specific language of numbers that cannot be argued with, that I was financially independent in a way that was complete and permanent and that had been built entirely by me, without any contribution from anyone in my family at any point. The third category was the one that had taken me the longest to build and the longest to decide to include. It was a record of the comments, not all of them, the ones that were specific enough to be documented accurately and that I had written down within 24 hours of their occurrence, with the date and the context and the exact language used as closely as I could reconstruct it. 4 years of comments at family gatherings and phone calls and dinners, organized by date, 47 entries. I had not known when I was going to use the folder. I had known that I was going to use it when the moment arrived that made using it both necessary and correct. My 30th birthday dinner, with 11 people at the table, and my father choosing that occasion to deliver the fullest version of the narrative he had been constructing, was that moment. I had brought the folder in my bag without telling anyone I had it. I had sat at the table, and I had ordered the food I wanted, and I had talked to the people I loved who were there, and I had felt for the first part of the evening the specific, uncomplicated happiness of a woman at her own birthday dinner in a restaurant she had chosen because she deserved to choose it. Then, my father put down his glass. He spoke for approximately 8 minutes. I timed it internally, not with a watch, but with the specific internal clock that develops in a person who has been the recipient of these speeches before and who has learned to track their length as a way of maintaining composure during them. 8 minutes. The longest version I had heard, the most public. He talked about my choices, the research career he had never sanctioned, the relationship I had ended 3 years ago that he had approved of and I had not, the apartment I had bought in a city he thought was wrong for me, the way I dressed at family gatherings that he found insufficiently traditional, the way I spoke at family gatherings that he found insufficiently deferential, the way I had, in his assessment, consistently and deliberately chosen a version of my life that showed disrespect for everything he had built and everything he represented and everything the family was supposed to stand for. He used the word disgrace twice. The second time he used it, he said, "You are a disgrace to this family, and I need you to understand that clearly." 11 people at my birthday table heard that sentence. I watched their faces while he said it. My best friend Amara across the table, whose expression moved from confusion to fury in approximately 2 seconds. My colleague Daniel, who had the specific, carefully composed face of a person managing his response in real time. My cousin Bisi, who looked at the tablecloth. My mother, who looked at her hands. 11 people. My birthday. The word disgrace. Twice. I did not respond while he was speaking. I had made that decision before I arrived at the restaurant. I had decided that I was going to let him finish completely. Every word, every point, every version of every grievance he had been carrying, because interrupting was not the response I was building toward, and because letting him finish in front of 11 witnesses was itself a kind of documentation. When he stopped, I sat for approximately 4 seconds in the quiet that followed. The 4 seconds of a table at which a man has just called his daughter a disgrace at her own birthday dinner, and nobody is yet sure what comes next. Then I reached into my bag, I placed the folder on the table between us, I did not open it, I did not say anything about it, I placed it on the table and looked at my father and waited. He looked at the folder, he looked at me. He said, "What is that?" I said, "Open it." He did not open it immediately. There was a moment, approximately 3 seconds, in which my father looked at the folder on the table between us with the specific expression of a man who has been in control of a situation and has just understood that the situation is no longer what he thought it was. Then he reached forward and opened it. He read the first page, the professional summary. His reading was visible on his face in the way that reading is visible when the content is surprising and the surprise is producing a recalibration in real time. He turned to the second page, the employment record. He turned to the third, the publication list. He read for approximately 4 minutes before he looked up. He said, "Where did you get all of this?" I said, "I built it." He said, "I know your record." I said, "You have been telling me and everyone else at this table that I am a disgrace." I said, "That folder is the record of what a disgrace looks like." He said nothing. I said, "Turn to the section tabbed in blue." He found the tab. He opened to the financial section. His eyes moved across the first page, the savings, the investment accounts. He turned to the mortgage documents. He looked at the purchase price. He looked at the date. He looked at my name on the deed. He set it down. I said, "Turn to the section tabbed in red." He looked at me. He looked at the folder. He opened to the red tab, the comments, the 47 entries. He read the first one, I watched the specific quality of a man reading his own words in a document that exists as a record of those words, and understanding for the first time what it looks like to hold a list of the things you have said to someone about whom you have just publicly claimed to be a disgrace. He read for 6 minutes. Nobody at the table spoke. The 11 people who had heard him call me a disgrace were watching him read the record of everything he had said to me across 4 years, and the room had the specific quality of a room in which something important is happening, and everyone present understands it, even the ones who do not fully understand the contents of the document being read. He closed the folder. He set it on the table. He looked at me. I waited. He did not speak immediately. I want to be honest about what came next, because the honest version is more useful and more true than a version where the folder produced an immediate and complete transformation in my father that resolved everything in a single dinner. That is not what happened. What happened was more complicated and more real. He sat with the closed folder in front of him for approximately 2 minutes. Then he said, "Nadia." I said, "Yes." He said, "You have been keeping this." I said, "For 4 years." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I knew this moment was going to come." I said, "I did not know when." I said, "I knew it was going to come and I wanted to be ready for it." He said, "This is a lot of work." I said, "Yes." He said, "You did all of this?" I said, "I have been doing all of this for 30 years. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He said, "I did not know." I said, "Dad, I know you did not know." I said, "That is the problem." I said, "I have been building this for 30 years, and you have been describing it as a failure for 30 years, and both of those things cannot be true at the same time." He said nothing. I said, "The folder does not describe a disgrace." He said nothing. I said, "I need you to say that out loud." He was quiet for a long time. The table was quiet. Amara, across from me, had tears on her face that she was not wiping away. My mother's hands were still on the table in front of her. My cousin Bisi was looking at my father with the expression of a young woman who was learning something about her uncle that she had suspected and is now confirmed in the knowing. My father said, "You are not a disgrace." He said it quietly, not with the volume he had used when he said the other thing, quietly, like a correction being made to a record. I said, "I know I am not." I said, "I need to know that you know it." He said, "I know it." He picked up the folder. He said, "Can I keep this?" I said, "That is your copy. I made 2. He looked at me. He said, "You made 2. I said, "The other one is filed with my attorney." He made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh, and contained something of both. He set the folder down again. He looked at me for a long moment with the expression of a man who is revising something he has been holding for a very long time, and is not sure yet what the revised version looks like. The dinner ended not long after. People left quietly with the careful warmth of people who have witnessed something significant and are processing their witnessing. Amara held me for a long time at the door and said, "Nadia." I said, "I know." She said, "The folder." I said, "I brought it for this." She said, "I know." I said, "Happy birthday to me." She laughed. I laughed too, the kind of laugh that has 30 years in it. My father called me on a Thursday, 4 days after the dinner. He said, "I have been reading the folder." I said, "I know." He said, "I read it 3 times. I said, "And?" He said, "I have been thinking about the comments section, the one in red." I said, "Yes." He said, "I did not understand what it looked like from outside my own head." I said, "Now you do." He said, "I am sorry, Nadia." He said it in the specific voice of a man who has arrived at something genuinely rather than performed it. I said, "I know you are." I said, "I believe that." He said, "What do we do now?" I said, "We start from what is true." I said, "The folder is what is true." He said yes. He said, I see that now. We are starting from what is true. It is slow and it is imperfect, and there are conversations still ahead that are going to require the same composure the birthday dinner required. But we are starting from a folder on a table at a birthday dinner, from 4 years of documentation, from 30 years of work that a man finally sat down and read completely. If you have someone in your life who calls you something you are not, document what you are. Build the record. Bring it when the moment is right. Place it on the table and say nothing. Let the truth do the work you have been doing alone for too long. That is my story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.